Ok, partiamo. Buongiorno a tutti.
We are ready. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the
di
last webinar of FA.B cycles dedicated to young unaccompanied migrants in Europe, promoted by Cidis, who promoted this family-based care for children in migration, a project funded by the European Union. Our purpose is to focus on reception of this specific target of migrant, young unaccompanied minors or young adults arriving in our countries. We are trying to improve the reception system, and we are trying to offer alternative family-based care, such as foster family or the life in a family context for young migrants, young adults. This cycle of webinars was aimed at improving the competencies and the skills of operators or of any stakeholders dealing with reception, dealing with support to young migrants, helping them to become autonomous, and to all the people working to improve the system and working for migrants and with migrants. FA.B project is coordinated by Cidis, funded by the EU, and we are supported by partners coming from 5 countries: Italy, Spain, Malta, Greece and Cyprus, with association as ISMU, the Italian Institute for Research, that is coordinating research on this topic. Hopeful children from Cyprus, not from Greece, and Por Causa from Spain, JRS Malta. All the countries on the Mediterranean, and that are particularly involved because they are assisting to a similar migration phenomenon. So we are sharing many points in common. We are sharing many common experiences. Today, with us, we are happy to welcome again José Carlos Cabrera Medina. We had the opportunity to meet him in the previous webinars, so I will just remind you that he's a researcher at the University of Granada, and he's an expert and counselor for many government and local administrations in Spain. He's an expert in migration policies, and he has a long experience also as cultural mediator, especially at the border of Algeciras, which is an important border in Europe. He is also a director of a radio program, the Mediterranean Ruta. They talk about intercultural communication, migration. It was awarded by an important award in Andalusia in 2022, and today he will keep on talking about effective intercultural communication and non-verbal communication. So last week he gave us useful information about this aspect, and today is going to continue to help us to improve our communication, providing practical tools for our daily work. I would like to remind you that you are more than welcome to give your contribution, make observation, asking question, or asking for clarification. You can use the question and answer chat box, and we will have a break for questions, and we will have another space for question and answer at the end of the webinar. I kindly remind you that you can listen to this webinar in Spanish, but also in English. in Italian and in Greek. You have just to select the symbol of the word, the icon of the word. And I would like to thank again our interpreters that have supported us during this webinar. So I give the floor to José Carlos. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all the participants joining us for this last webinar of this exciting and interesting project about unaccompanied young migrants and migration in general. Maybe someone of you already participated in the last webinar last week about communication, and today we are going to talk about intercultural communication because it is essential to dialogue with people belonging to other cultures. In this webinar, there are people that belong to the same socio-economic context, the EU, but we have different cultures. They have different cultures. So people belonging to other cultures can give a valuable contribution because they have different perspectives. I like to remind that we are cultural human beings. We carry the culture. We wear the culture. We wear glasses. I like to imagine that we are wearing glasses, and through these glasses, invisible glasses, can go and can see much beyond. We have a different perspective because we received different values, and through these values we can assess and interpret the reality. So these glasses can be very different according to the country or according to a specific area in the country or in that country. So today we will continue to talk about effective intercultural communication, and in particular about non-verbal communication in Northern Africa. And the purpose is to show that we are cultural subjects. We have our own cultural baggage. So we will focus on non-verbal communication, and we will have the time to think about the way we communicate in our languages or using our mother tongue. In my opinion, it is a special aspect. It is extremely interesting, and it is valuable to share this experience with people coming from other countries. I do hope that each one of you, at the end of this webinar, will go home with a sort of take-home message that will be different according to the country. So we will focus on non-verbal communication in Northern Africa, from Morocco to Tunisia. It is more or less the same. The communication in this area is more or less the same. I am Spanish. I have a Spanish culture, so I will give you my perspective, which is the perspective of a Spanish man. But you come from different countries, different European countries, and you may have different perception or different views. In this webinar, we will focus on some gesture that maybe exist also in other countries, but that may have a different meaning, and they could be misleading. Sometimes they can completely transform the message, they can completely change the message, and this could result into cultural problems. So we are focusing on an effective intercultural communication, because the knowledge of non-verbal communication is key to go closer or to move away from the other person. Last week, I told you that knowing non-verbal communication of the other people, of our interlocutors, is like having a key to open a door on a relationship that can help us to reach different goals. Today, what I'm going to tell you during the webinar is just a result of my 18 years of work in a center for minors. I had the opportunity to see a huge flow of migrants in the city of Algeciras in Spain. Algeciras is on the border in the south of Spain, just 15 kilometers from the African continent. So that is a place where minors arriving at the border were then moved to the reception center where I used to work. So today's webinar is focused on my experience matured in 18 years of work with migrants. Now I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will focus on many gestures, many movements that maybe are common in Italy, in Spain, in Malta, and that maybe are used in the same way, but to convey this meaning. So we will focus on how to use this gesture to communicate and to educate and to be able to use this tool at best. I was just saying that the most important thing when we attend a course or when we participate in a webinar is to go home with a sort of take-home message. And I would like you to bring home the image of a penguin. Last week we mentioned the penguin. That is an animal moving in a clumsy way on a slippery surface. It's a bird, but it cannot fly. And for many cultures, it is an absolutely clumsy animal. But it is important to remember that when it changes the means, so when it moves from the ice to the water, changes completely and becomes an extraordinary swimmer, one of the most skillful animals and most skillful hunter on the ice, on this huge ice surface that we could metaphorically compare as the cultures of others. He walks in a clumsy way, and but when he dives into the cultures of others, he becomes very skillful. So most of the time, the foreigner, the person in front of you, is not only a stereotyped image, it is much more than this. So we have to reflect, and we should ask ourselves, what kind of penguin we would like to be when we are in contact with other people? If we want to be the clumsy animal walking on ice, or if we want to become skillful, clever, fully aware of the complexity of culture, of the culture of the person in front of us. Last week, we mentioned the different way that people used to greet. Today, I will quickly summarize some of the information we focused on last week, because I would like to focus on certain aspects. If we talk to people of Muslim or Arabic culture from Tunisia, Morocco, or Algeria, we know that they greet in a specific way, and this depends on the gender. A man greeting another man does it in a different way than a woman greeting another woman, or couples or groups. And today we will focus on this. Maybe you remember this slide in a very graphical way. I try to remind you what is the protocol, the greetings protocol in the different countries. In French, well, the French protocol is very similar to the Italian protocol, and I think it is very similar to the English protocol and maybe to the Greek one. But in Arabic countries, the protocol is pretty different, much longer. And this is the standard way of greeting. How are you? Fine, thank you. And you? Fine, thank you. More or less 5 seconds. But when people from Moroccans meet, this greet does not last for 5 seconds. And they do not listen to each other. The protocols of greetings, it's completely different. In this slide, of course, I am exaggerating, telling you that the greeting lasts for 3 minutes and 56 seconds. I am, of course, exaggerating, but it is absolutely true that the way people greet in Northern African countries is much longer. A Moroccan man would pronounce this long speech. I'm going to read it. Radia Mizien, Slateulala, Entajitu, Lambasalé, Kujemesian, Kremesian, Usalabapas. And now, in this moment, end of the greetings. So, this is the end of the greeting, and it is pretty longer than the way we greet in our countries. This is a tool, because if I know how to greet, I can open a door. So if I greet as I do in Spain, fine. But if I'm able to greet as the other person is used to greet, unconsciously that person has a pleasant feeling. So the approach is completely different and absolutely positive. We create a sort of familiarity, and of course the reaction is positive. And this can be really useful, because if we know how to do that, the way the other people see us is completely different. Remember that greeting is the first approach, is the first step, is the first image that the other person may have of us. And this will permeate the whole relationship and the negative or positive idea about us. Very often, it is the way we unconsciously perceive the other person. When I approach a person from Northern African countries, Morocco, Algeria, or Tunisia, the way I greet is quite surprising for these people, because they do not expect that kind of greeting from a Spaniard. So suddenly, I become something different, someone different from the people that they usually meet. So I use this tool to approach them in a different way and to be closer. Non-verbal communication, and this is extremely important, deals with the way we feel. And the way we feel is closely connected, is correlated with the way we communicate. Especially for men, Northern African men, the greetings protocol is different. They kiss on the cheeks, and the number of kisses they exchange gives us many information about the familiarity, about how close they are. The greater the number of kisses, the closer their relationship. Most of the time they are relatives. So if two Moroccans meet in front of me and they exchange 4 kisses, I know that they are close. I know that maybe they are family members. This is really useful. And in the center I used to work at, that was extremely useful because we received people that declare to be relatives of some children. And they did it just to bring take these children and bring them to other countries. But when I observed the way they were greeting, I could immediately understand if it was true or not, if they were relatives, if they were family members or not. So being aware of the non-verbal communication is also a preventive measure to fight human trafficking. And there is a simple gesture as the gestural code of greetings to reveal that. When I greet as they do, I am imitating a different greetings. For example, if a Moroccan person greets us in the way he usually does it, we could think why he speaks for so long, why he makes so many movements, why is he making so many movements, and we could feel not at ease. But I would like you to have exactly the opposite perspective. Can you imagine their reaction if we greet them as we do in Italy or in Spain or in Greece, in a very brief, in a very short way? So greetings can give us a lot of information. Moroccan people think that Spaniards are very detached because we greet very quickly, and this is completely different from their standard. So this feeling of detachment, of something cold and not very expressive, can project an image of me in this case and of my culture, which is completely different. Maybe all the Moroccan thinks that Spaniards are cold and not very expressive, and so these feelings are stored unconsciously. In Morocco, men used to kiss each other, used to touch the right hand of the other person, and they move towards each other using the elbows. And also women exchange kisses, but the last 3 kisses on the same cheek. So one cheek maybe on the right and the other 3 kisses on the left. And they keep on saying, how are you? Thank you, very fine. And you? All fine, thanks God. And what about your children? They are fine, all fine. It is a continuous exchange of greetings, and this is the way they greet. So greeting is much longer than in other culture, and in our cultures, in my culture for sure. So it is extremely important to know these protocols, but most of all, it is crucial to use them. I try to use them in my daily work. Just give me the time to find the right slide, and I'm going to share it with you. Can you hear me? Yes, fine.
Hemos hablado de los besos entre hombre y hombre. Ya les digo,
we mentioned the kisses between men.
Entre hombres suelen darse besos y también las mujeres suelen
Moroccan and Algerian men exchange kisses, while women, they also exchange kisses, up to a total of 4 kisses. You know that in the EU and in our countries we greet in different ways. Please remember that not in every country of the Arabic world, greetings are the same. In this webinar, I'm focusing on Northern African countries. The 2 men you can see in the picture comes from Yemen, and as you can see, they greet in a completely different way, touching their nose, rubbing their nose. This gesture is not used in Northern African countries. Sometimes people used to kiss their shoulders. This is another greeting, and you may meet a person, and this person does not kiss on the cheek, but kiss the other person on the shoulder, maybe because it's very hot, or maybe because people are sweating or they have a sweaty face, so they prefer to touch and kiss the shoulder rather than the cheek. And this is a very common way used among Muslims, especially when they go to the Mecca. You know that it is a purification journey, and visiting the Mecca is one of the milestones of their religion. And when they meet at the Mecca, they used to greet in this way, kissing the shoulders. In this image, you can see that it is important to greet at the same time. So the main difference is not just the length of the greetings, which is much longer, but also the fact that these people talk at the same time. They never interrupt each other, and they don't greet in an alternate way. They answer the question and ask a question, maybe saying exactly the same thing, but speaking simultaneously. And it is important what they say, but most of all, how they say. So they greet simultaneously. When they approach, they greet at the same time. They ask and answer at the same time. And this is opposite to some gesture that we can see in some psychology manual. For example, in the manual in Spanish, you can see that putting the hand on the shoulder of a person may indicate power or influence, and this gesture can be interpreted in this way in our culture, but in the Northern African countries' culture, the meaning is completely different, and we shouldn't misunderstand it. In the Arabic and Muslim culture, the right hand is the hand used all the time when they greet. Is the only one hand used when we approach another person. The first contact is always with the right hand, while the left hand is used for aspect relating to hygiene. So we should never use the left hand to greet. We should greet always with the right hand, because right hand represents everything. We can offer an object, we can offer food. Remember that nobody in the Arabic world or in Arabic countries will use the left hand to greet. So remember to use the right hand. The right hand is the hand opening the door and creating a contact with the other person. Remember that when we approach a woman, we shouldn't offer our hand, but waiting for the woman's hand. And if the woman doesn't offer her hand, then we should put our hand, our right hand, on our heart. It is a gesture we make to greet the other person. But in Spain, sometimes it can be misleading. So if I give my hands to a Muslim country and I ask, how are you? Oh, fine. And then I put my hands on my heart to accompany this gesture and make it more Northern African. But some Spaniards told me that the impression was that we are cleaning our hand after shaking the hand with the other person. So sometimes a gesture which is completely positive and pure and transparent can be misinterpreted, and this may compromise the subsequent communication. So I do insist on the importance of being fully aware of this gesture, because we can understand the point of view of the other person, but we can also try to be like a familiar person to them. So remember the importance of right hand, especially when you greet. So do never greet using your left hand. This is the gesture I was mentioning before. In Northern African countries, when you give your hands, if there is a contact with the hand of the other person, then we put our hand on the heart. This gesture may be misunderstood, but it is very common. Many Moroccans distinguish themselves from the other Arabic citizens because they put their right hand on the heart. When a man greets a woman, he has to wait for the woman to give him her hand. If she doesn't do that, it is important to put the hand on the heart and say good morning and greet. This is the best way to greet a woman, if we are men, of course. Normally, when two women meet, in these pictures you can see two queens. One has just divorced, the other one is Rania, the Queen of Jordan. Usually they kiss each other on the cheek, on the right cheek first, and the other three, usually the other three kisses on the other cheek. There are also other gestures they commonly do in other areas of Northern African countries. For example, at the border between Morocco and Algeria, the border, there is a rural culture. Most of the time in this area, women live in rural areas. They do not have the opportunity to travel abroad, and they greet in this way, using the back side of the hands. They squeeze their hands, and so they greet in a different way. In the area of Jebala, when they speak a pre-Islamic language, so a language that was spoken before the Islamic language, women usually greet each other by shaking hands. And now we go on with the description of the gesture. So we know what happens between men and between women, and between men and women. But what happens when groups meet? And this is another important aspect, to be closer to Muslim people or to people coming from Northern African countries. when
nos daremos cuenta de
we
que
meet
una
a
persona cuando
group,
entra en contacto con un grupo concreto
we have
debe de
to
saludar a
transform
todas y
into
cada
the
una de las personas
penguins
que se
swimming
encuentren
in
allí
the
sentadas.
water. So
Esto, que puede resultar también un
the
poco
person
extraño, fundamentalmente para
has
los
to
que
greet
somos
every single
españoles,
person of the
nosotros,
group.
por ejemplo, lo que hacemos es
Maybe
decir
it's
hola a todo el mundo
strange,
y
or
con
it is
esto pues
at
damos
least
por
strange
concluido un
for
saludo
people
muy
in
básico.
Spain. We
Sin
just
embargo,
say
en el caso
hello
de nuestros
everyone
entornos no es
in
así.
Spain,
Tenemos que ir uno a
and
uno
we
dándole
greet
el
the
punto
whole
a
group.
cada una de las
While
personas
in
y
this
repitiendo
culture, in
ese
Northern
saludo
African
largo
countries,
con cada una
it
de
is
ellas.
essential
Si se
to
fijan,
greet
cuando estén
every
con un grupo
single
de
person
norteafricanos
and
se darán cuenta
repeat
cómo el
the
saludo tiene que
protocol,
ser
the
uno a
long
uno y además
protocol we have
mucho más
just
largo
seen.
que
So the
probablemente como lo hacemos
greetings
nosotros en el norte de
must be
África. Si
directed to
nosotros nos
every
acercamos
single
de esa
person, and
misma
it is
manera a
much
ese
longer
grupo,
than
de repente
our
pensarán
greetings.
que somos alguien familiar, más allá de que tengamos una cara
In this way,
muy
the people
europea, ¿no?
will
Bueno, seguimos
think
avanzando
that
un poquito
we
hacia
are
adelante en este taller de
trying to
comunicación no
become
verbal nos vamos a
familiar.
encontrar
We are
pues más
trying to
saludos, ¿no?
reduce the
Más allá
distances, even if we come from
del
another country.
saludo habitual.
And the
Otro
next
aspecto, como estamos
gesture
viendo en la
is
imagen, es
this
también
one.
que nos pueden ofertar cuando una persona pues tiene la mano un poco sudada
When,
o la tiene llena de agua
for
o
example,
la tiene sucia.
the hands
Los
is
norteafricanos
sweat or
ofrecen,
dirty
en vez de la palma de nuestra
or
mano,
wet
nos ofrecen
for
la
any other
muñeca.
reason,
Una muñeca que nosotros
Muslims
pues podemos después
used to
coger
give
para poder hacer ese
and to
saludo.
offer
Por ejemplo, en este caso, pues en vez de dar la mano así,
the wrist
utilizaremos la
and not the
muñeca y cogeremos la
hand.
muñeca para
So
hacer el mismo
they
saludo
give
que solemos hacer
the
habitualmente.
wrist, they offer the
Por ejemplo,
wrist,
este
and
gesto
so
que
the
muchas
other
veces nos hacen así
person
con la mano,
takes the
pero
wrist
no sabemos qué
to
quieren hacer. Nos
shake
quedamos un poco
hand
como,
or to
no,
shake the
¿por qué
wrist.
me estás dando la
Sometimes
muñeca para qué? No acabo de
we
entenderlo. Y es simplemente porque
think
pues, tengo la
that
mano sucia o la
this
tengo mojada
gesture
y
is
prefiero
strange. We
ofertarte
are
así para que no tengas que
surprised.
ensuciarte, mojarte
But we have to
con lo
consider
que
that
tenga yo
maybe
en la
that
mano, ¿no?
person knows that his hand is
Vale, por tanto, un
dirty
gesto
or
también bastante
sweat
habitual
or wet, and so it is a
en
sign of
este tipo
respect,
de países
and
y
it
de
is very
culturas.
common
Bien,
in these
seguimos un poco
countries
hacia
and in
adelante. Aquí
these
tenemos, por ejemplo,
cultures.
también cuando una mujer, bueno, con cierta observancia sobre
And
su
now
religión,
let's focus on
muy
women
estricta,
and
pues
on the
no nos va a dar
greetings
la mano. Yo siempre
between women and
aconsejo
among
que si nos
women.
encontramos en una situación de este
A
tipo,
very
pues
religious
que no
woman
ofrecemos nuestra mano para saludar,
may
sino que
not
nos llevemos directamente la
give
mano
a
al
hand,
corazón,
may
más
not
allá
offer
de
the
que
hand.
compartamos
And
pues ese tipo de
remember that
actitud, ¿no? Y
it
los
is
valores de
advisable
ese tipo de
not
actitud.
to
Pero
offer
bueno,
the
si
hand
nos
to this
interesa
woman, but it
acercarnos
is
a otra
much
persona,
better to
pues
put
lo que yo
the right
recomendaría
hand on
sería
the
siempre
heart in sign of
ofertar
respect. But if we
nuestra mano
really
en el
want to
corazón para
greet
poder
that
saludar.
person,
Las personas mayores también tienen un
I
trato
do
diferente.
recommend
En este
to
caso,
be
aquí lo están viendo,
respectful
es un trato un
and
poco
to
específico, donde muchas
remember
veces pues
to put your
se
hand
besa
on the heart.
la cabeza
And
de las
when we
personas o se
greet
besa también
elderly
la
people, the
palma de las
gestures
a las
are
madres
different.
y a las
Usually,
personas mayores se suele
because
besarle
of the
en la
respect that
cabeza
is owed
o
or
en la
and
palma de las
professed to
manos.
the elderly,
La palma de las manos, por ejemplo,
usually
hace esto. Se coge
they
la palma de la mano de
kiss
una persona mayor y en vez de
their
cogerla, pues
head,
se le da la vuelta y se le
or
besa delante. Es un gesto
they used to kiss the
absolutamente
palm of the
de
hand.
respeto
So we
también
take the
en la
hand,
cultura
we turn it, and
árabe.
we kiss the palm.
Bien,
And
el
it is
siguiente
a gesture
gesto
of
tiene que
respect
ver
and
más
affection in the
con,
Arabic and Muslim
con el tono de voz,
culture.
¿vale? Que quizás con un gesto concreto. Cierto es que las culturas mediterráneas somos bastante
Another important
ruidosas,
aspect is the tone of
pero lo
voice.
cierto y verdad es
Sometimes
que
the
no
tone
todas
is even more important than
las
the
culturas
gesture. We
mediterráneas
know that
somos tan ruidosas como
Mediterraneans
otras.
are noisy.
En mi
We
propio país
speak
dicen
a
que
loud
nosotros
voice in the
somos más
Mediterranean
ruidosos
countries,
que la
but there
gente del
are the
norte.
due differences.
Yo,
In
si tuviera que
Spain,
decir quiénes son los más ruidosos de
in
Europa,
Spain,
pues
it is
seguramente no diría
common
que
to
somos
say
los
that people
españoles.
from the south
Así que,
are
bueno, sí que nos
louder
encontramos
and
con que
noisier
la
than people
cultura
from the north.
árabo-musulmana
Well,
norteafricana pues es por lo menos más ruidosa que
I
la española.
wouldn't say
Y
that
esto nos da también
Spaniards
una
are
serie
the noisiest in the Northern African countries, they speak very loud. They are very noisy, much noisier than Spaniards. And sometimes, if we don't know that this is perfectly normal, we may be worried about the volume of their voice. Maybe we have the impression that they are about to fight or to discuss, while it is not like that. It is a habit. It is something very common, even if they are not fighting or they are not quarreling. But I know that many educators and many operators were not sure about that and misinterpreted the tone of voice. And now I would like to go on with gesture. This gesture is very common in Italy as well. I don't know if we can say the same for other countries, but in Italy I know that this is a very common gesture. I'm sure that it is pretty familiar for Italians. In Northern African countries, in Morocco, in Algeria, it is very common. For example, if we are at a distance, maybe in the street, if we are at distance, we can use this gesture to greet. And maybe we say, "Hello, Alessandra, how are you? Are you okay?" Maybe in Italy, this gesture has a completely different meaning. In Spain, it is totally not significant, or we do not attribute any specific meaning to this gesture. But remember that if you see someone making this gesture, you can give this gesture many different meanings. But remember that in Morocco and in Algeria, it is something which could be similar to a handshake. And we used to say, "How are you? All fine? Are you okay?" We are greeting at a distance and we are telling the other person that everything is okay. This gesture may be easily misunderstood in Italy, for example. In Spain or in other countries, we cannot misunderstand because we do not use this gesture. Remember that this same gesture, but with the hand making a sort of circle, if we rotate the hand in this way, it means slowly. So, for example, if Alessandra is speaking fast and I am from Morocco and I cannot follow, I can make this gesture and it means, "Please speak slowly." So this is important because if you are talking to someone and the person is making this gesture, the meaning is that we should slow down, or we can use the same gesture to ask the other person to slow down. It means to go slowly. In Spain, we make this movement but with the hand open. We use a different gesture, while in Northern African countries, they make this circular moving to ask to slow down. There are other gestures. Good morning, how are you? Fine, thank you. These are the gestures we can use to greet at the distance. And then there are also other gestures. For example, this one. This gesture corroborates the idea of a lot, full, replete. This gesture, for example, made with hands upward and the thumb moving from inwards to outwards on the chin, especially Morocco, is used to say a lot, full. For example, there are more than 50 participants in this webinar. There are many people, there are many participants. In Morocco, especially people from the south, may make this movement with the fist, while in the north they do the same gesture but with the hand open. today, how was the Zoom room today? Oh, it was full of people, and I could make this gesture. So I can understand from this gesture if that person comes from the south or from the north of Morocco, and this is a vital information because we are talking about people with different needs, with different migration pathways. As educator, I can adjust my attitude, I can understand their needs, and I can have a better awareness of their pathway, and I can better understand what do they need to be fully integrated if I am able to analyze their gesture. I remember that I learned to make this gesture many years ago because a young boy told me a Moroccan man is threatening me, and he threatened me to cut my neck. And he was making this movement, but actually what he wanted to tell me was that he asked this boy, and he was telling me to wait to do something because there were many people. So I completely misunderstood at the beginning, but then once aware of the gesture, I could understand, and I was able to prevent conflict on that occasion. When we talk about non-verbal communication, of course, we have to consider the wide range of movements. So remember that when we mean a lot, we can touch the chin. In Italy, I know that a similar gesture may have a completely different meaning, even if it is very similar. So again, pay attention to the gesture, pay attention to the meaning, because they could be misleading. Another curious gesture is this one, the arching of the index finger with the rest of the hand closed. This means that the person is angry, is not satisfied with something. For example, if I scold a boy and I use this gesture, I'm telling him or her, I'm angry, I'm disappointed because of your behavior. And this is not the best time of our relationship. So I'm sending a very strong and clear message. Especially if I am interacting with another person. So this is extremely important for educators working with young people, because using this gesture, I could tell the young people I was working with that I was not happy with their behavior. I was disappointed by their behaviors. I don't know if it's time to have a break. Maybe it is time to have a break, and if you have questions, I will be more than happy to answer. There is just one question by Irma Aili. An Egyptian boy, before giving his right hand, he used to kiss it. What's the meaning of this gesture? Probably is a boy that at the moment is at the reception center where Irma works, I think. So what's the meaning of kissing the hands before giving it? In Egypt, the gesture as well as the language of course are different, and they are different from the other African countries. I'm not an expert of non-verbal communication in other countries, because the pathways of Egyptians, migrant do not involve Spain. But this is a vital question. Thanks for asking it, because we know that this gesture may have a meaning. So I think it is important to understand what happens if I do the same gesture. How do they react if I kiss my hand before giving my hand to the person in front of me? So it is important to see if the reaction is positive or negative. So if the reaction is positive, I may consider that it is good to keep on making that gesture with the other Egyptians, because I could be perceived as closer or more familiar. I remember that in the center where I used to work, day by day, I try to integrate their gesture into my gesture, and I could immediately understand that I was creating a different communication channel. I was able to focus on certain aspects because they trusted me and they understood that I was trying to find the best way to communicate. Any other questions, Alessandra?
No, al momento non ci sono
No,
altre
not
domande,
at the
quindi
moment.
direi di
So
approfittare per
we
prenderci
can
10
have a
minuti di
10-minute
pausa,
break.
saranno esattamente poi al termine. Quindi sono le
And
11:27. Ci
we can answer the
ritroviamo alle
questions at the end of the
11:40.
webinar. So
Ok?
let's meet at 11:40 to go on with our webinar.
Riprende fiato e noi
See you
prendiamo
later.
caffè.
Thank you.
Buona pausa a tutti. Eccoci di nuovo. Riprendiamo subito.
Hello everyone again, and we are ready to resume.
Degli strumenti che José Carlos ci sta
We
fornendo.
keep on talking about the tools that José Carlos is providing us.
Muy bien, pues continuamos con este taller.
We
Con
can go on.
algunos gestos, ¿no?, que os estoy intentando traer y que, bueno,
And I would like to
representan
show
una
you
oportunidad,
other
un
gestures.
instrumento para acercarnos al otro y sobre todo
Some of
para
them
aparecer
may
ante
be
el
a
otro
tool
de una manera
and an opportunity
una
to
manera
get
que nos
closer
pueda
to the
ayudar
other
en nuestro
person and to appear
objetivo
different.
fundamentalmente educativo. Comparto con vosotros
If we use these gestures correctly, we can achieve an important results in terms of education. I'm going to share my presentation again so that you can see my slideshow. This is probably one of the most important gestures because it usually precedes an episode of violence in the northern African countries. Usually before a fight, before a physical fight, there is a sort of warning message. And the warning message is this one, the one you are looking at. So touching the right earlobe to inform the other person, and this is true in Morocco and Algeria, to inform that something violent is about to happen, and being able to recognize this gesture is fundamental to prevent fight and to improve the daily communication and the daily relationship in our centers. This gesture maybe in your country has a completely different meaning, but in Northern African countries, it is accompanied by the expression attention in French, attention, and it means next time we won't talk. Next time words won't be enough. It will be a physical fight. So if we can recognize the meaning of this gesture, we can prevent violence. In case of clashes among people in Northern African countries, as a Spaniard, I have observed something which is deeply different from my culture, and I would like to share it with you because I think it may be useful. Usually, Moroccans and Algerians, when they start a fight, when they start a quarrel, they go closer. They go closer to the other person because the first attack is brought using the head. So they hit the other person with their head. So they tend to move closer to each other. It is something that in the Spanish culture never happens. We usually don't start a fight hitting the other person using the head. So, of course, we hope this kind of gesture is never something that we need to interpret promptly to prevent the fight, but as you may understand, it is essential to know the meaning of this gesture. So remember that in Northern African countries, the fight begins with an approach with the two people approaching and hitting each other using their heads. Another important aspect with respect to our culture is that most of the time they do it in a complete silent atmosphere. In Spain, before a fight, everybody screams, they shout, people shout, while in these countries there is a total silence. So when people are silent, they are not speaking, well, pay attention because something is about to happen. While when there is a lot of noise, where everybody talks, I am much more relaxed because I feel that it is the normal way of communicating. While maybe in the past, or maybe some of my colleagues interpreted the silence as a moment of calm and peace, but it is exactly the opposite. Another gesture is this one, and it is important to interpret it correctly to prevent bigger problems or major problems. And it is crucial to know it to be able to intervene and to be able to communicate with the young people from Northern African countries. This gesture has a completely different meaning, and it means camaraderie, and it means a close relationship, friendship. For example, look at this picture. Someone is telling a joke, and the other person is laughing, and the two people offer their hands, the palm of their hands, and they shake it or they just put their palms in contact. This is particularly common in Northern American countries when people give the five, hit their palms, especially in sports. But in Northern African countries, this gesture expresses complicity, and so one person extends the hands and wait for the other person to do the same. So this is very common in Morocco, Algeria. Let's imagine that I'm telling a joke, and I'm telling a joke to Alessandra, and if I see that Alessandra is laughing, I can give her my hand, and maybe she could take the three hands of my the 3 fingers of my hand or the 4 fingers of my hand, and this gesture is extremely effective because if we make this gesture, it is as if we can be on the same level, at the same level. Especially when we work in a reception center, you know that most of the time educator has a sort of authority, so it is not an asymmetric, it is not a symmetric position compared to the young migrants, because we are educated. Well, if we use this gesture, we can be at the same level, and we can use this gesture to attract young people, to trigger some sort of interest, and to be at the same level, to have a better communication and to be perceived as more familiar. So knowing these gestures was key to have a more asymmetric role. For example, if someone used to say something funny, the person used to give me his or her hand, but I didn't squeeze the hands, just to avoid to be at the same level, if that was my purpose. So I know how to use that gesture, and I know how to use it if I want to keep a distance, because I have an authority. But I also know how to use that gesture to create more complicity and to be perceived in a different way. And of course, it depends on the purpose I want to get, on the goal I want to get. I remember a child, a group of children actually, that didn't communicate much, but as soon as I started making this gesture, they understood that my intention was to enter their personal sphere, to enter their bubble, and I use this gesture to open the door, to enter their world, and to talk about topics or situations that would have been impossible to deal with without that sort of complicity and camaraderie. And now let's focus on other gesture. Another important one is this one. So, touching the heads, hitting the heads 2 or 3 times using the palm of the open right hand. And this gesture means please. Please. The expression is accompanied by an expression, characteristic gesture expressing complicity. And so this gesture creates an asymmetric relationship with the other person. So if I hit my mouth with my open right hand, I'm asking, can you please do this one for me? Can you please do me a favor? So if I do this, of course, the 2 people are not at the same level. The person asking for a favor is at a lower level. When I saw this gesture for the first time, I answered, okay, I can help you, but I want you to modify your behavior, because if you do that, you will be better integrated. So I used this gesture because I knew exactly the meaning of this gesture. So I used this request for a favor to ask something different, something that can be useful for that person to be better integrated, to be fully integrated. So this expression, this gesture means, please, I'm asking you a favor, please do that for me. I remember I was in Morocco and I had a problem with the pneumatic of my car, and I asked for help using this gesture. And I asked, please, can you help me with my tire? I'm not able to replace it. It is a very common gesture in Northern African countries.
en el cual podemos aprovechar para
So
otro tipo
it immediately creates an asymmetric relationship, so the two people are not at the same level, and we, as educator, we can exploit, if I may use this term, this gesture to obtain a different purpose. For example, they asked me, can you please help me with the documents? And I said, yes, I can. But in return, I want you to be better at school, to have better marks at school. So this gesture was an opportunity for an exchange of favor for educational purposes, of course. Another very useful way to communicate in the daily life of the operator is using this gesture. It's another gesture that in Spain it is commonly used, but in Northern African countries has a different meaning. You can see the hand rotating at the same level of the head. This is the movement. So moving the hand in this way. In Spain, maybe we do the same gesture with a finger. Maybe you have the same gesture in Italy and you use it to say that someone is maybe a bit crazy or is not feeling very well. In this case, they also raise the elbow, and the meaning is that that person is not feeling very well. In the reception center I used to work at, some young people used to use this gesture to tell that someone or other young people were using toxic substance. They were inhaling glue or detergents, for example. And you know that it is something dangerous, and it is done on purpose to provoke some sort of effect. So when a boy or a girl used to make this gesture, he or she was telling me that someone was using toxic substance or drug. And so he or she was giving me useful information to manage that difficulties, to tackle that challenging situation as educator. So this is a very common gesture in Northern African countries. And it is essential to understand the culture. Sometimes you working with young unaccompanied migrants, I realized that non-verbal communication was key. Also, when we talk with other Spaniards, in Spain, we look for eye contact when we talk. And the other person looks for our eye contact as well. But in the Arabic or Muslim countries and in Northern African countries, the look can be perceived as a threat. So, for example, when talking to a child, when scolding a child, the child unconsciously lower his or her head. And in Spain, we have an additional problem because we do expect an eye contact. We do expect the child to look at us in the eyes. And if the child does not follow this scheme, well, we cannot understand. So a Spanish educator doesn't understand the real meaning of this gesture, but actually the educator was expecting an eye contact, that the eye contact was not happening, and the educator was even more nervous or upset. But if we correctly interpret this gesture, we can easily understand that this gesture means that the child or the young person is trying to escape the reprimand, but it is rather a submission or a respect gesture. Remember that in certain countries, looking at the people in their eyes, it is perceived as a threat. Another interesting aspect is queuing. Well, in Europe, the concept of queuing is pretty different if compared to African countries and Northern African countries in particular. So it is crucial to be fully aware of the many differences. It is a completely different way to create relations, to build relations with other countries. In Egypt, people are not used to queue. The queue in Egypt or in African countries is just a sort of the movement. So imagine an arrow, and the queue is just the direction of the arrow, but it is not an ordered line of people. When I used to work at the reception center, I clearly understood that these migrants were not able to queue as we queue. But imagine the arrow and the queue is just the main direction. Let's focus on another gesture. Open hand, open palm of the right hand and fingers together and turning the wrist from one side to the other. It means more or less in Spain, not too much or not too little, regular. It's an intermediate level. How are you? So, and making this gesture. This is the meaning in Spain or in other European countries. And this is more or less the same also in African countries. But this gesture, for example, think of the inventor of Facebook, Zuckerberg. If Zuckerberg were Algerian or Moroccan, he would have never used thumb up to express I like. He would have used this gesture, which means fantastic, good. We would have seen this gesture on Facebook and never the thumb up, because this gesture in Northern African country means very positive, very good. So this gesture can corroborate a good behavior, can endorse a good behavior. I remember that there were Algerian migrants in the place where I used to work, and I used to tell them, very good, well done, good job. And I used to make this movement. I was accompanying my words with this movement, projecting the finger outward, and in this way, they could immediately understand that I was satisfied with their job. So it is a gesture that can improve self-esteem of many young people, because it means well done, great job, very positive. And it may be really useful to trigger a positive reaction or a positive behavior in the person, especially in young people. With a simple gesture, with a simple movement, we can confirm, we can support, we can corroborate what we are saying. So this gesture begins with a sort of fist, and then the hand opens and the fingers are stretched out. Calling someone is another important gesture, because when we call someone, we are also communicating our position and our relationship to that person. For example, think of a policeman in Morocco or in Nigeria. He doesn't use this movement. They use the palm of the hand facing downward. This gesture creates a sort of asymmetrical position. So if I am telling a Moroccan, come with my palm downward, with my palm upward, we are at the same level. But if I face my palm downwards, I am underlying my role. I am adult, I am an educator, and you are a younger person. So when you need to communicate something important, use your hand with palm downwards. But if you want to talk about something positive, or if you want to have a more familiar relationship, a more friendly relationship, hands facing upwards. So the position of the palm has a completely different meaning. The direction of the palm gives a completely different message. And regardless if we are from Malta, from Italy, or from Greece, we can change the meaning. So the gesture is important, but it is even more important to use it in the right way to obtain what we want to obtain. And this is another interesting gesture, which means to run away, to flee, or to escape from something. The gesture is made using the two hands, making the same movement. It is a very common gesture in Morocco. The two fingers and we move index and the middle finger to simulate that someone is running away. For example, if I ask Khaled, where is Mohammed? And he answers in this way, moving fingers, it means that Khaled ran away. In Spain, it is pretty intuitive. So the idea is on horse riding, but in their culture, it means running away, escaping. Other gestures, this one, for example, it is a very common gesture, and it is a sort of warning message we are giving. I think that in our countries, we use the same movement to make a correction or to warn someone. I think that in Africa and in Spain and maybe in other countries we use the same gesture. Another interesting gesture is this one, putting the hands on the heart with the head slightly bent on the right side, and instead of saying hello, we say forgive me. Forgive me because I made a mistake. Please forgive me. It's not necessary to say that in Arabic, but if we put our hand on our heart, and if we move the heads on the side, the message is I am asking to be forgiven for something wrong I have made. It is also important to remember that men holding hands is very common in Northern African countries. In this image, you can see two policemen. It is very common And it
Este
does
gesto
not
no es habitual
suggest
en
any
España. En
particular
España,
sexual
hombre con
inclination.
hombre nunca
It is very common.
paseamos de la
In
mano,
Spain,
mujer con mujer
it
es
is
muy
not
raro ver
common.
pasear a
Usually
dos mujeres de la
men
mano, pero
don't
es
hold
muy
hands.
habitual
It's
que
very rare
personas
to see
norteafricanas del mismo
women
sexo pasen
hands in hands or
con
men hands in
dándose la
hands.
mano.
But in Northern African countries,
Desde el punto de vista
it is very
educativo, a mí me
common.
interesaba mucho este gesto porque cuando algunos jóvenes querían
From the
pasear
educational point
conmigo
of
de la
view,
mano,
this is an
yo
extremely
sabía que era
important gesture
justo el
because
momento
when
adecuado
young
para poder trabajar
boys
cosas
and boys
que
wanted
eran,
to
pues,
give me
digamos,
their
más
hands,
delicadas.
well, I knew
¿Vale?
that
Es
that was
un
the
gesto
best
que convierte la
moment to
situación
talk about
en
very
un gesto de
delicate issues.
complicidad, en un
It
entorno de
is a
complicidad. Y desde el
gesture,
punto
it
de
is
vista
an
educativo, para
intimate
mí era
gesture that
muy
changes the
positivo que
relationship.
alguna persona
We
me agarrara de la mano para
create a
pasear
feeling
conmigo,
of
ya que,
complicity,
bueno, era el momento
and
adecuado
it
para
is an
poder plantear
absolutely
cosas,
positive
pues,
signal.
importantes.
Because if
Es
someone
cierto que
gives
para mí,
us
como
his or her
español, era
hands,
un
well,
gesto
that
que
is the
me
right
costaba
time
mucho
to talk
trabajo,
about
porque yo no estoy
important
acostumbrado
things,
a
delicate
pasear
things.
de la mano de
In
ningún hombre.
Spain, of course, it was an
Pero
effort for me
sabía
because
que
I'm
si
not used to
aguantaba mi
talk
propia cultura,
hands in hands with a
podía
man.
generar un espacio
But
adecuado para mi acción
if we can
positiva de
overcome
educación.
and
¿Vale? Así
forget
que, bueno,
about
de
our
nuevo,
culture, we
superar
know
mi
that we
propio
can
ser cultural
reach
en pro
an
de crear un
educational goal,
ambiente
which is
adecuado para
key for that
poder
person.
trabajar
So
con esa
I
persona
had
de
to
una manera más
take off
cercana.
my glasses of
Más gestos,
cultural
pues sí, tenemos
person
más gestos,
and focusing
como
on the
por
needs
ejemplo
of the
este que
other
tenemos
person
aquí,
to work
que significa
better.
beber, es un gesto
This
bastante
is
diferente
another
al
gesture.
gesto
The
que
meaning
hacemos
is
nosotros en
drink,
español.
but
Se suele utilizar
it is
el dedo
slightly
pulgar
different
y
from
bueno,
what we do in
también es curioso
Spain.
cómo utilizar ese
We
dedo pulgar
use
así hacia
they
abajo
use a
significa
thumb,
verter algún líquido. Oye, ¿qué ha pasado aquí en la mesa?
and if we move the
Bueno, pues
thumb
se hace de esa misma manera.
downwards,
¿Vale? Luego vamos a
it
ver también
means
otro
that
gesto,
we had
como es el de
poured
llamar por
something. For
teléfono. ¿Vale?
example,
Llamar
if
por
I
teléfono
ask what
se
happened on this table
hace
and they
norteamericano se hace
answered making
con
this
estos dos
gesture, it
dedos que estáis
means
viendo
that
aquí y de repente no lo
some
llevamos
liquid
al oído,
was
pero al revés.
poured on the
Fijaros,
table.
así.
And
De
this
tal
is
manera
another
que eso significa
gesture
pues, querer
to
hablar por
talk
teléfono o
about
querer comunicarse con alguien.
telephoning or the
Fijaros, son
desire
estos
to
dos dedos que tenemos
talk
aquí así, creo que los veis
over
todos,
the
¿vale? Y luego le
phone.
damos la
So
vuelta
with the
para
two
llevárnoslo
fingers
como si fuera un teléfono. ¿Vale?
placed
Pues este gesto
against the
de
ear,
querer hablar por teléfono cuando no tenemos
simulating
teléfono móvil. Ya
the,
sabéis
the
que casi
telephone.
todos los migrantes del mundo,
And
si
it
traen una
means
cosa, es
that
un teléfono móvil.
there
¿Vale?
is
Que
a
a veces
desire
pues,
to
nos
phone,
plantea
especially
muchos
if they
problemas
don't have
dentro
the
del día a
mobile phone.
día
You know
de los
that
centros educativos. Por lo
migrants
tanto, la utilización
have their
también del móvil
mobile phones.
como
Most of the time, it is the
bueno,
only
un
one
aspecto
thing they
también que
had.
deberíamos de
They
llevar
have,
a
and
nuestro terreno.
sometimes their mobile phones
Yo
represent
construí
a
hace unos
problem
años una
for us.
aplicación
So
para
this
móviles
gesture
para
is
que el teléfono no fuera siempre
familiar to
un
us. Some
elemento
years ago,
disruptivo,
I
sino que pudiera ser también un
had
elemento positivo
conceived, I have
a la hora de
devised an
poder jugar,
application
aprender cosas que
to
eran necesarias
transform the mobile
para estos
phone
jóvenes
into
a lo
a
largo de su
tool
periodo de
to
inclusión, ¿no?
learn something
Mientras estaban en los centros de
useful
protección.
for these younger
Bien,
migrants
más gestos
for their
tenemos aquí. Bueno, el
inclusion
gesto creo que viene
while
ahora
they were at
es el
the reception center.
bueno, el de robar. Es un gesto porque no sé si en otros
This is
países
another
donde están ustedes
interesting gesture.
escuchándome, pues
The gesture of
lo
closing
conocen
the
o les
hands
suena.
with the hand
Es muy
facing
habitual también en
downwards
español, que es
means
hacer así con la
to
mano,
steal
recoger
or
los
that
dedos de
someone
esta
has
manera. Esto significa
stolen
que
or
es un
the fact of a
objeto
robbery.
robado
It is
o
a
que
very common
el que
gesture in Spain and
se está
maybe in
dedicando,
other
si me
countries,
permiten la expresión, a
and
cambiar
it
las
means
cosas de
that
sitio sin
someone
permiso,
has
¿vale? Este gesto
stolen
pues funciona en
something
todo
or
el norte
he's
de África y
stealing
significa para
something
decir
or is
pues que se
involved
está
in
robando, ¿vale? Que se está robando. En
robbery.
España funciona
So he's just
exactamente igual. Es un gesto,
changing
en
the
este caso,
position of
universal,
things
que
without
no sé si
an
funcionará mejor en
authorization.
otros
So we
países.
are talking about a theft.
Este
It is
gesto también
a common
que
gesture,
tenemos
maybe
aquí,
also in
pues
other countries.
nos recuerda también pues una realidad bastante importante de ciertos
This
chavales
is
que
another
atendemos en los
gesture
centros de
that
protección a la infancia y que
is
pues,
very
han pasado
common,
desgraciadamente por una situación de calle.
and
Son
we
chavales
can
pues que utilizan
commonly observe it in the migrants hosted in the reception center, and this means that maybe they have used cheap drugs such as volatile drugs or drugs that can be inhaled. Sometimes detergents can be inhaled. So it refers to the gesture of inhaling volatile drugs. It is performed in this way, taking the nose between the fingers and squeezing and taking the nose with the other hand. So it means that the boy had used drugs or someone is using drugs. So when I see this gesture, I immediately understand and I pay attention because it means that that person or someone else has used inhaling volatile drugs. And this is another gesture that can be very useful. This is the gesture used to talk about the phone, and this is the gesture used when young migrants want to talk over the phone. Well, this gesture deals with religion, Muslim religion, of course, and it's a form of gesturing that is repeated throughout the Arab world. Fingers are always raised. It is very common in the Arab world, and when they talk about something particularly important or where they are speaking of God, they keep their fingers raised to say that it is He who is speaking directly. And there is another gesture that means praying, or that the person we are talking about is praying. And it is another very common gesture. I saw this gesture many times in the reception facility I used to work. Most of the migrants were Muslim, and some of them left the room to go and pray. And they told me, they used to tell me that the person was praying by making this gesture. So they keep the hands close to the ears, and this means that the person is praying. This is a photograph, which is very clear because we can see the gesture. Some of the migrants in the center helped me to create this material to show you these gestures. So the meaning of this photograph is that the person is praying. Asking for the bill is another special gesture, and according to the area, we can find different gestures. This is very common to ask for the bill or to say someone that the credit they had has been fully paid. This means that the debit has been fully paid and there is no longer a link of this kind between the two people, or you can use the same gesture to ask for the bill in a restaurant or in a bar. When I saw this gesture, I answered in this way, using the finger in this way, and the message was, don't ask, you can't ask me more, I am upset, so you won't obtain anything else from me. Another important gesture deals with the way we sit, so sitting on the chair, pushing backward and showing the sole of the shoes is considered unpolite and definitely negative. This posture is perceived in a negative way in the Muslim or Arabic country. When we sit,
tienen que estar también en el
we
suelo.
must
No
keep
debemos
the feet
cruzar las piernas y
over
enseñar
the
la
ground.
suela de los
We
zapatos o
mustn't
la
cross
planta
our
de los
fingers,
pies.
and
Es
we
una
mustn't
acción de
show
mal gusto.
the
Es
sole
una,
of the shoes or the
digamos, una
feet
acción
to
de
the
mala
other people,
educación.
because this
¿Vale?
is a
Normalmente la planta de
very
los pies es la
unpolite
zona
gesture,
más
bad
sucia,
taste,
la planta de los zapatos es la zona
not
más sucia
kind,
y por lo
and
tanto
not polite,
nunca debe de
because the
enseñarse
sole
a
of
la
the
otra persona.
shoe is
Por eso,
dirty,
golpear
is
a una
always
persona con una
dirty,
zapatilla
and
es quizás
it
el
shouldn't
gesto
be
más deshonroso que se le puede hacer
shown to the other
a una
person.
persona musulmana. Lo hemos visto algunas veces en televisión cuando
For
algún
example,
dictador
using a
ha
slipper
sucumbido
to
y
hit
las personas se
someone
quitaban el zapato
is
para
a
dar con el
very
zapato
negative
a las
gesture.
estatuas de esa persona, como un gesto donde con la parte
In the
más
riots
sucia de mi cuerpo
we have
te
seen,
estoy golpeando, ¿no?
we
Es
saw
realmente un
that
símbolo,
the
pero
people
un símbolo
use
que se
the
traduce en nuestro
shoe
día a día
or the
cuando
shoes
nos
to hit
sentamos delante de un
symbols or
musulmán. No debemos
statues, and this
intentar cruzar las
is
piernas
a
porque
gesture
puede
of
que podamos nuestros
total
zapatos
lack of respect.
se
So do
vean,
never
nuestras
cross
suelas
your
se vean
finger.
y eso
Do
sería un
never
gesto,
show the
digamos,
sole of your
negativo en
shoes
nuestra
to the other
época, ¿no?
person.
No vamos a
Because if the
encontrar
other
musulmanes
person
que
sees the
pensaran
sole
de
of
esa manera.
our shoes,
Bueno,
the
esto es un trozo
reaction
de un cómic que luego
is
voy
very
a
negative. It
recomendar.
is
Aquí no lo
a
vemos muy
gesture
bien y
that
está en español,
it is
pero antes de terminar esta
strongly
clase voy a
condemned,
recomendar este
and
libro
this
por
is a
si alguien se quiere
cartoon.
acercar
It's in Spanish.
como una
But
noticia,
before the end of the
como una
webinar,
lectura
I'm going
inspiradora
to
a
recommend
este taller
this
una vez que terminemos.
book because it is
Bueno,
a
este segundo
very
gesto,
interesting reading,
muy
and I will
sencillito,
give you a
pero
list of
también muy
titles.
interesante, y es que solo
This
lo
is
hacen los hombres,
another
¿vale?
simple
Los hombres
gesture,
norteafricanos cuando les
but
gusta
very
una mujer,
interesting.
pues normalmente hacen este gesto, que es el de
Men
pasarse
in
el
Northern
dedo
African
por
countries
aquí, por la
love
mejilla, porque
making this gesture
normalmente la
when they
cultura
want
hacía que
want to
las
say
mujeres,
that when they want to communicate that there
las
is a
mujeres
lovely lady,
guapas,
there is a
estuvieran
lady they like,
tatuadas.
there is a
Y
pretty lady around,
ese tatuaje
and
debajo de
in
la
the
boca,
uh,
de arriba hacia abajo,
Islamic
pues es un gesto
culture,
donde en determinadas
women
partes del norte de África
had
se utiliza para
tattoos in
decir
the
que una mujer
past, and
es
this
guapa.
gesture in some areas of
Bueno,
Northern
¿tenemos alguno
African
más?
countries
Vamos a ver.
means that that lady
Bueno, ahí lo tienen un
is
poco. El mal de
pretty
ojo.
and good
La
looking.
brujería. Bueno, la brujería está también muy presente
Another
dentro
gesture
del norte de África y está tan
related
presente como
to
que en muchos casos cuando hablamos con determinadas personas,
witches
pues para ellos es una
or
verdad
to
absoluta. No sé
rituals,
si lo saben, pero en el
and
norte de
it is
África
very,
muchas
very
puertas
common in
se
Northern
adornan
African
con una
countries.
mano, la llamada mano
And
de plátina,
for many,
una mano
it's an
con 5
absolute
dedos
truth.
para
In
protegernos
many
del mal de
of
ojo,
the doors
¿vale? Para
in Northern
protegernos
African
de que
countries, you can
alguien
see a hand,
quiera
which
algo
is the
malo para
Fatima
nosotros.
hands.
Bueno, hay determinadas partes
It's
en
a
África donde
hand
se
with
pone la mano así
five
para
fingers,
evitar
and
que
it
esa persona pues
protects
pueda
the house from
dañarnos con
negative
alguna frase, con
spirits,
algún aspecto
from bad luck,
determinado, una palabra
from
determinada.
envy.
Bueno,
And
si
so
alguien ha
it is
hecho
a
algo
sort of
malo, pues mira,
protection
podemos
for the
también
house
meter el
and
dedo
for the
entre
people
nuestros
living in the
dientes,
house.
¿no? Para decir, oye, es que eso que has hecho está mal,
If
Víctor.
someone
Eso que
has
has hecho
made something wrong,
no
we
me
can
gusta,
make
está
this
mal.
gesture,
Eso
just
no
putting
está
the
bien hecho lo
fingers
que
between
haces.
the teeth,
Simplemente haciendo
and the
así.
meaning is, I don't like
Curiosamente,
what you
hay otro
did.
gesto que es también,
I absolutely
perdón, estaba
condemn
haciendo así.
what you
Hay
did.
otro gesto
This is a
que
gesture.
es también muy útil desde el punto de vista educativo y es
And there is
pasarnos
another
el dedo
gesture,
por la
very
mejilla.
useful, which is this one.
Vale.
Just
Este gesto significa
passing the
me da
finger on the
vergüenza lo que
cheek
estás
in this
haciendo,
way.
porque lo
This
estás
means
haciendo mal. Es un gesto que a mí desde el punto
I feel
de vista
ashamed
educativo
for
me ha
what you
servido
are
mucho
doing
cuando alguna persona
because you're
estaba
doing
haciendo
bad.
algo que no debía hacer.
And that
Simplemente
gesture
pasarme el dedo
was
por la mejilla.
extremely important to
Por
me
ejemplo,
because I
yo
could
salía de paseo con
understand
alguno de los
how to
jóvenes con los que
use
estaba
it.
trabajando y alguno de
And
ellos
when
hacía una
someone
cosa
was
indebida. Y simplemente
behaving
le hacía así.
negatively or was doing something wrong, I simply used this
Lo estás
gesture,
haciendo mal.
and that person immediately understood. I was telling that
Simplemente ese gesto,
person,
que a lo
what
mejor
you're doing is
puede que
wrong.
signifique otra cosa
Just
en
this,
italiano,
a
pero
simple
este gesto
gesture
era
Maybe in Italy this gesture has a different meaning, but in those countries it is very powerful to say that I am not approving, I am totally against that behavior. The opposite of this gesture is this one, opening the finger, and that gesture means well done. Good job. So this one, fingers on the cheek, completely negative. So these are two simple gestures that can become extremely useful in our daily work. We can communicate in a different way. We can enter a new sphere. We can create a completely new relationship with young migrants from Northern African countries. Another simple gesture is this one. We need to use the two hands. We make a circle using both hands. So if the boy asks me how many things were correct and we answer in this way, it means everything was correct. All good. We are about to conclude, and I would like to focus on communication, as particular non-verbal communication, but also virtual communication, social media, because it is part of our world, it is part of our daily life, of our routine. We have seen many gestures to better communicate with people from Northern African countries. At the moment, I am working and I'm focusing on problems resulting from misunderstanding and resulting from misunderstanding of emoticons in Malta, in Greece, in Cyprus. Maybe you use different emoticons to comment. And when we talk about people from Northern African countries, if we use the same emoticons we use, if we use our symbols, well, we can create huge misunderstanding. I remember once I used this emoticon, using the fingers, and the message I wanted to say, the message I wanted to convey was, I am the first one to be interested. Why they thought I was talking about God because the finger was pointing upward. For example, this gesture in Spain means all fine, while in that word it means no value, useless, it doesn't worth doing that thing. So remember, bear in mind, be aware of the difference, because we share the same space in the network, but it is extremely important to know how to use emoticons to convey the right message. And remember, please remember, if you do not remember the gestures of today, at least try to remember the importance of being the penguin and ask yourself what kind of penguin I really want to be. The clumsy penguin and the cultural penguin that can generate a cultural conflict, or I want to be the excellent swimmer, I want to be the excellent hunter, I want to be able to discover the other culture. I can decide to move clumsy on the ice or to dive into the other person's culture. This is totally up to you. Last week, I was asked to recommend some books or good readings that can inspire and that can help you to communicate non-verbal communication better. And I mentioned this book, Papalagi. There are also some books in Italian, and other books are just in Spanish. Anyway, last week we mentioned Papalagi. It's a very simple book. It explains, it gives us a detailed description of how we are perceived by the others. Another interesting book translated into Italian is this one. It can help us to reflect on our daily job, on our daily work. We work with people that are in the process of integrating in our society, and we can better understand the experience of the second and third generation. He is a great Lebanese writer now living in France. This is another book. It's a cartoon. The author is Deleuze, he's a Canadian writer. He has worked as an illustrator, and in this book he tells us about his experience in China, and he focuses on cultural differences. By reading this book, we can easily understand how the people living in our country but not belonging to our culture, well, it is easy to understand how they may feel. And this is another book, Marmelata con Laban. It's a lovely book written by Elena Mahey. In Spain, the title has been translated into jam, which is marmelata jam with yogurt, while in English it's jam with laban. And it is about Arabic families migrating into our countries. Another excellent reading, inspiring reading that maybe is not so close to our cultural environment, but it is essential to understand cultural conflict, is this book. Heart of Burma is the title. And there is also a film about the same book, a film of 1953. We can find many cultural information that can be useful for us to be better educators. I have concluded, and I would like to remind you that I have put together about 70 gestures, and I have tried to select the gestures that, in my opinion, can be really useful for our work. I have included the list of readings in the presentation, but if you have questions or curiosities, feel free to ask. Thank you so much, Jose Carlos. Yes, we have some questions. Just give me the time to read them. What's the name of the app that you mentioned, the app that you invented? It would be useful to know it and download it and, of course, using it. The application was created several years ago thanks to the support of a video games company and thanks to the support of the UN. I can write the name of the application in the chat box, and I can put the link in the chat box. Let me see if I'm able to write in the chat. But yes, you should be able to write in the chat box. Who is the person asking? Gina Gallo. I'm sorry, I'm not able to write in the chat.
Sí puedo. Ya he puesto a Gina, he puesto el enlace Creo que pueden verlo las otras personas, no lo sé. Si no,
Well,
yo te voy a
I
pasar el
have
enlace.
put the link in the chat, so
Ok,
just please
vediamo.
confirm
Aspetta,
that you can see the link.
Dai condiviso con tutti.
No sé si puedo
Allora,
responder a todo el mundo.
io non lo vedo.
I'm sorry, I
Bueno,
can't see the link.
de todas maneras, puedo
Allora,
pasar.
se
Can
tu
I
mandi
send the link
a me,
to the whole group?
io poi lo
Well,
condivido via
Carlos,
mail.
please, Jose Carlos, please send
Perfecto.
me
Ahí
the link
voy a
and
mandar
I will
2
share it
aplicaciones.
with
Bueno, voy a mandar
our
un
participants.
post que hice para un blog
So actually
con
there are
5 o
2
6 aplicaciones que creo
applications.
que son útiles
I
en
will
el
send the
entorno
post
de
that I
centros de
have already
protección y
used
en
for a
centros
blog,
afines a refugiados.
and
Es un
I
post que está
will
en español,
tell you
Alessandra,
the name of
pero que
5 or
vienen
6
los enlaces
applications that can be used for
a las
refugee
aplicaciones,
centers, reception
aplicaciones que
center.
yo tengo en mi propio móvil
They are
porque
in
son muy útiles
Spanish,
a la hora
but you will
de
find a
trabajar
link
con jóvenes
to
extranjeros.
other apps, and these apps are
Perfetto. Poi
extremely
lo condivido, sarà
useful to
nostra
work
cura
with young
condividerlo
migrants.
proprio attraverso le mail,
Thank you,
per cui sarà una
Carlos.
cosa che
Thank
rimane
you, Jose
attraverso i
Carlos. We will
partecipanti,
share
altrimenti se lo mettiamo nella chat rischia poi
the
che rimanga
material
qui.
with the
C'è
participants.
un assistente sociale, credo,
Social
dell'obiettivo fanciullo
workers
del Lazio
from
e del
Obiettivo
Molise,
Fanciullo
che è
from Lazio
un'associazione,
region
e mi
and
dice:
Molise
una delle
region,
mie
they ask,
titolate dell'area
one of the person I'm
subsahariana,
working
quindi
with coming from
probabilmente è
sub-Saharan
un tutore,
Africa,
mi descriveva
probably
e
this lady
raccontava
is a
cosa
tutor,
significassero
was
alcuni gesti.
describing
Uno,
the
toccarsi la
meaning of
guancia
some
o il
gesture,
mento, come
touching the
state
cheek or the
spiegando.
chin,
Quindi ovviamente molti
exactly
dei nostri
as you have
partecipanti
just
stanno
explained.
riscontrando
So I think that
tante,
many
diciamo,
of the
conoscenze ed
participants
esperienze
are
che hanno
recognizing
avuto.
in your words
Sí, yo creo
some of
que
the
para mí es
experience
importante que
they
hagamos esa
had.
reflexión porque pasan muchas cosas delante nuestra
For
que
me,
parece que no tienen
this reflection is
sentido o no tienen
crucial because
significado y pueden sernos de ayuda
we see
incorporarlas a
so
nuestro día
many
a día.
things that can be really useful, and it is important to integrate this gesture,
Esatto.
this
E
information into
appunto
our
Sandra ci
daily
conferma che è una
work
tutrice
to be
legale di un
better.
minore straniero non
Sandra
accompagnato
confirms that
secondo la
she's
legge
the guardian of an
47
unaccompanied young migrant according to
Infatti,
the law 4717,
ovviamente è preziosissima
and
questo incontro, queste informazioni sono
this
preziosissime anche per i
meeting, this
tutori
webinar,
che
and the
devono,
information provided
come gli
is
educatori, come i
essential
mediatori,
because
instaurare
guardians, as well as
anche, insomma,
educators and
in
and
meno occasione
mediators,
dei tutori e degli educatori, perché hanno
maybe
meno
less
contatti con i
frequently, but in
ragazzi,
any
un
case,
rapporto
they
di
have to
fiducia
create a relationship of trust,
per poter lavorare con loro
to
in
work with
maniera
them
virtuosa, no? E
in a
accompagnarli
virtuous way and
all'autonomia in
to
maniera efficace.
accompany
Io
them
volevo
towards
chiederti una
full
cosa
autonomy. I
che
have a
diciamo
question for you, Jose
un
Carlos. I would
parere.
like to know,
Quasi tutti i giovani migranti con cui ci troviamo a lavorare sono maschi, tanto
most
più
of
quelli che
the
vengono dal
migrants are
Marocco e
male, especially
dall'Algeria.
those coming from
Invece
Morocco or Algeria, while
diciamo, la maggior parte
the
degli educatori e
majority
delle
of the
educatrici appunto che
educators
lavorano nelle strutture
and
sono donne.
working in the structures, in the facilities,
Questo
are
tante volte,
women.
diciamo, nella lente invisibile attraverso cui i ragazzi ci vedono,
In the
come è
perspective and in
percepito
the
e
perception of the young migrant,
cosa
how
anche
is
dei,
it
diciamo,
perceived,
piccoli gesti,
and
piccoli suggerimenti puoi darci per
is it important to use a
appunto
special gesture, or
agevolare
is it
forse un
important to
po' la
have
comunicazione, il rapporto
special
tra di noi, che
tips
a
to
volte è un po' più
improve
complicato, diciamo,
communication that
rispetto
may be
ai nostri
a
colleghi
bit
maschi?
more complicated
Una
for
pregunta
women
muy,
rather
muy, muy
than for men?
interesante, muy
This is
interesante.
an
Hoy
excellent
hemos empezado el taller haciendo
question.
referencia de
Thanks for
género.
asking it.
Efectivamente, hay una gran
We
diferencia de género todavía, desgraciadamente, con
started talking
la
about
cultura
gender
en los países
differences.
norteafricanos.
Um,
Eso no cabe duda
there
y
are
afecta
differences.
muchísimo a
There are
nuestro trabajo.
gender differences.
Es curioso
We all know
cómo
that.
los jóvenes migrantes
And There are differences in our culture, but also in the Northern African countries' cultures. Young migrants know the role of women. They know about the role of women and they are informed about such role in the reception centers. So we have a huge responsibility because the way women interact with the young migrants gives a sort of imprinting about the way these people will interact and will consider women. There are many prejudices, especially negative prejudice. There is the wrong idea in Northern African countries that women in Europe are freer and not very serious, easy to approach from every point of view. When a woman appears and when they see that this woman has a role as an authority, well, young Muslim, particularly men, they are facing an image of women that is completely different from the image of women they have in the legal order of these countries. Adults, male adults, have their mothers under their protection. So I do recommend to Spanish educators, especially when they are in contact with these young males for the first time, to keep a physical distance. Usually, a Spanish woman greets kissing the other person on the cheeks. We tend to greet in this way, as we do in our country, because this is what we do, and it is perfectly normal in Spain. But don't do that with young male from other cultures, because they are not used to this kind of approach. It is strange to them. They think, well, she should be my educator and she kisses me, and no one in my culture would dare doing so. And this fuels a negative image about women, an image that will be difficult to eradicate, a stereotype difficult to eliminate. So, especially in the reception center, we should make an extra effort, and this is true also in the European facilities, that in Italy, men and women are equal. It is a deep, even if invisible, cultural difference, but it can transform into an obstacle for women and for young migrants, and it can prevent achieving educational results. So at the beginning, try to be as an Arabic woman in an Arabic word, and then step by step, very slowly, you can try to approach in a different way. I'm a man. And my approach is different and easier. It is important to have a different approach. Also, men should give importance to the role of women, should appreciate the role of women. And this is extremely important.
Grazie mille, José Carlos.
Thank you so much, José Carlos.
Una volta ricevuto il post con le app, possono inserirle.
And the question is if they can use the application you have suggested, if you can disseminate them. Of course, these are applications that can be commonly used. Everybody can download them with a tablet or with mobile phone. They are free. You can find them in the App Store or in the stores.
Okay, l'ultima osservazione.
They can be downloaded for free. This webinar has been valuable. This is what our participants are writing. The application of the information is not immediate. We must pay attention to gestures. And Adriana Papagna has just written this message. Thank you for writing it, Adriana. Yes. These are pills of knowledge, pills of culture that can be used to work easily. Sometimes just recognizing a gesture can be a huge contribution to the relationship, and step by step we can try to use them. To me, the success of this webinar is being able to recognize this gesture. So if after this webinar you can be able, you can recognize this gesture, well, this is the best result you can achieve, we can achieve. Thank you, Jose Carlos, for all your precious, three precious contributions. So we were able to fully emerge into this reality, into the world of young migrants from Morocco, from Algeria, and your experience is extremely important. You come from a very important and vulnerable area. Thanks to you all. I would like to thank the interpreters. We will share the material with you through the FA.B platform. Please keep on visiting the platform, keep in touch. You will receive a newsletter to be informed about our new initiatives. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Jose Carlos, if you want to say just a few words to conclude, and then we are at the end of this experience. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Bene, allora vi auguro buona giornata e
have a nice rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.